Welcome back to this Talking Europe special from Portugal. In part one of our programme, we were looking into the reasons behind the recent deadly forest fires and some of the solutions being put forward to combat them. We've moved on now to central Portugal. We're close to Tomar, and we've come here to meet two people. Beekeeper Clotilde Ferreira, hello, nice to meet you. And MEP Miguel Viegas, hi, hello there. So I'd just like to start with you, Mrs. Ferreira. I understand that your bees were impacted by the fires. What happened to your bees and beehives?
We were affected by the fires. We used to have 300 beehives, but now we only have half that amount because so many were burned. There are no flowers, and the large-scale eucalyptus production works against us because it's all eucalyptus and no flowers. And then there's climate change. When it's hot, the flowers don't produce nectar, so the bees can't get the food they need to produce the honey.
And I understand that you and your family have signed a joint letter with many others around Europe accusing the EU of doing too little about climate change. What do you want from this legal case? Is it compensation?
We wrote our letter so that there would be a rethink concerning the planting of trees, so that less eucalyptus would be planted. We also want some help with our productions. We would like some financial help. Right now, we have no subsidies or aid.
And have you had a response from the European Commission?
No. Since we wrote the letter, we've had no answer.
Well, thank you very much for telling us about your bees and about your case, Mrs. Ferreira. Thank you. Well, Miguel Viegas, let's continue our walk through this farm. Do you believe that this kind of demand is achievable, looking for real action from the EU on something as big as climate change?
Madame a tout à fait raison.
Mrs. Ferreira is absolutely right, but we need many more people to make this kind of demand. We need a real grassroots movement, like what we've seen with the youth climate protests. We've been talking about this for 30 years, but our CO2 emissions are still growing. This shows that what we've been doing up until now hasn't been effective.
So what more can be done at the actual EU level?
The European Central Bank's injected billions into the economy without putting any conditions on how that money is used. What we want is for our money to be put into a strategy that's based on public investments in public transport or the energy transition. But we really need to invest in this, and above all, we have to prioritise the public sector, because relying on the markets to provide solutions isn't working. CO2 emissions are still growing.
Now, you're yourself from the Portuguese Communist Party. If you're defending these very green, ecological, quite radical ideas, why not team up with the Greens?
But of course, we agree on many aspects, and we're counting on the Greens to work together on this. We think the Greens are still relying on the markets too much, carbon markets and eco-taxes. We think it's not good enough. We absolutely have to put the public sector front and centre to be able to fight climate change effectively.
Just returning to the issue of these bees, we can still see the hives here behind us. I know you're interested in bringing more biodiversity around Europe. How can that be achieved?
We think it's possible to find a balance. In this balance, there can be eucalyptus, which is important for our paper industry, which is truly decisive for our development. But we have to leave space for diversified forest, which needs to have public policy backing it up to make it viable. Our forests can perform a sort of public service for our society, and we have to make this financially viable. That's what can make a difference.
Can you really convince the paper industry, the paper lobbies?
We say yes, eucalyptus is necessary, but we still need some balance, and that's what we're pushing for. This farm's an example which proves that it's doable. So we have to replicate this example in other places to revitalise our rural areas.
Well, Miguel Viegas, thank you very much. Nice to meet you. And we're going to look into your neighbouring country now, Spain. That's where our reporter has been to find out about how insects are being put to work in the name of biodiversity. This report comes to you from Luke Brown.
Tuta absoluta, a little bug that can do a lot of damage. Its larvae can destroy 25% of a tomato crop.
And it's the larvae is inside eating the leaf. If you get a very high amount of this larvae, you can lose completely the plant.
Biological control aims to use natural solutions to counter destructive pests. Here they're working on developing a larvae that feeds on the tutor moth's young. This research is part of a pair of EU-backed programs, Emphasis and Euclid, that aim to protect European agriculture. The threats are constantly evolving. Tuta absoluta arrived from Latin America 6 years ago. Native predators haven't been able to adapt rapidly enough.
Globalization has impacted very much agriculture because invasive pests pose really a risk, because when they arrive, nothing is known, nothing about how to manage, how to deal with these pests.
Those solutions could be vital in agriculture like this. Known by locals as the Sea of Plastic, its 35,000 hectares of greenhouses are vulnerable to fast-spreading pests. It's a proving ground for the next generation of biological control. Enric Vilarifa develops predators for commercial use at AgroBio, one of the world leaders in biological control.
We distribute it at the top of the leaves. And they will establish in the crop and start multiplying.
Here, farmers have long relied on heavy pesticide use in the densely packed greenhouses. But biological control meets growing consumer rejection of chemical solutions.
In Europe, we want to have more healthy fruits and vegetables. When we started biological control in Almeria, was really a good solution. It's working better than chemicals, and it's cheaper than chemicals. And the good insects are doing the job. So what we do is only reproduce what already happens in the nature.
These bugs could soon be big business. In France, biological control represents 5% of crop protection. The government wants to triple that by 2025.
Well, there are plenty of insects here on this location we've brought you to now. Also the birds, perhaps you can hear them. We've come here to this farm in southern Portugal to meet one of Portugal's top climate change experts, Professor Filipe Duarte Santos. Thank you for being with us. Hello. And the man who owns and runs this farm. Hello there, Alfredo Sendim.
Welcome.
Now, Alfredo, this is quite a traditional kind of farm in a way, I understand. Can you tell us about what you have here and what you do?
So we run here a very complex system based on trees. There are chêne, oaks. They produce acorns. We use acorns for animal feeding, but especially for human feeding. And then we have different types of animals, cattle, we have sheep, we have pigs, we have chicken for eggs, for broilers. Then we have primarily plants like leguminoses, cereals, and horticulture.
So a little bit of everything and actually kind of in the same place often?
Yes. It's a mosaic of biodiversity that it's mainly pushing by cooperation.
And Philippe, this is something that historically is actually very traditional in Iberia.
Yes, I mean, it exists in Spain. It's called Dehesa. Here it's called Montal. And it started around the Middle Ages. And it's a very sustainable ecosystem, agro-forest system.
So it's something that's quite old and traditional, but Alfredo, I understand you're somewhat of a pioneer. In terms of modern farming, this system is relatively new, in a sense.
So it's an innovation that we will recover this inspiration, and with the new technology and the new challenges that we have today, we pick the inspiration, but of course we have to develop it, and we have to see if we can even doing a better system and more adapted to climate change.
Well, thank you very much for telling us about your farm, Alfredo. We'll leave you to carry on with your work. Thanks very much. And Philippe, let's take a little walk here alongside these trees. And clearly, as you explained, there's a big interest in terms of biodiversity, but also in terms of desertification. We've heard a warning that as much as half of Portugal's land could become desertified within the next few decades.
Yes, we have here a very big infrastructure that is very positive as regards adaptation to climate change, which is a huge dam, one of the largest dams in southern Europe, which is called Alqueva. And this has allowed for intensive agriculture, But the problem is that one has to take care about the soil, because the soil is essential for agriculture, and the water from this dam has a lot of fertilizants, and therefore there is the risk of salinization. We have almond growers coming from the United States here, because in the United States what happened is that there is no water for so many almond groves, and therefore they came here, and they are reproducing what they did there here. This is not sustainable, you know. I mean, it will work for 40 years, 50 years, but then what about the quality of the soil?
So in terms of this model of farming here then, do you think it's something that should be actively promoted by the national government, by the EU, financed as well?
Yes, I think so. I think this is an asset, you know, from the point of view of nature, of biodiversity, that is very important for Europe. The important thing is that the European policies on farming, on agriculture, take really into account the specificities of each country, you know. And it's very important that they talk with people. They visit farms like this, you know, not in an office. I mean, politicians and the people who help them have to come to the ground, I mean, and talk to people who know, who live here.
Well, we can see absolutely how green this area is, how diverse the landscape is. And as we've heard in our programme, Portugal is literally playing with fire at the moment. Unfortunately, things always come back to money. However, there are a lot of people, especially in rural areas, who are suffering economically. Is it viable to think that more Portuguese farms could transform into this model?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, it's a question of incentives. There have been incentives to cattle, to grow cattle. Now, cattle is not adapted to this ecosystem. So putting cattle here, well, it gives money for a certain period of time. It's lucrative, but then you don't have the system.
Well, thank you so much, Filipe Duarte Santos. It's been so interesting to talk to you. Thank you so much for your time.
Very nice. Thank you. Thank you.
Well, and moving on from these agricultural solutions to bringing about more biodiversity and helping to hold off desertification, Luke Brown, our reporter, has been up into Northern Europe to have a look at some more technological solutions, as it is predicted that sea levels will rise and land all around Europe will become drier.
Rising sea levels are part of everyday life on the island of Texel. Here, behind the dunes and dikes holding back the North Sea, this land is considered too saline to be useful for productive agriculture. But a team of researchers has been working for a decade to reverse that belief.
These are the drip irrigation lines, and from these drippers comes brackish water. So we have 7 salt concentrations on the field. We have fresh water on one side, we have pure seawater on the other side, and we have 5 intermediate steps.
Bas Bruning has been studying the effects of salinity for 12 years. Up to 8 different varieties, mostly potatoes but also cabbages or carrots, are tested at a time.
This is the brain center. This is where we mix our irrigation water. Here comes in salt water, here comes in fresh water. The water is mixed in this tank, and when the right salinity level is reached, the water exits this building from here, and the water is irrigated on the test facility.
The UN estimates that each day 2,000 hectares of irrigated land are degraded by salt worldwide. Successful varieties here are still productive at up to 4 times the usual maximum salinity. Rather than despairing at rising sea levels, the salt farm Texel team wants to see it as a resource.
We will have to start seeing the salinity as a valuable resource, as something that you can work with and you can produce food with. And we believe that approach to use the salinity instead of fighting it is we have to do that. It's inevitable if we want to keep being able to feed the people there where they are living with the salinity problems.
A quarter of the Netherlands is below sea level. But the salt farm Texel project also aims to share the knowledge found here with more vulnerable countries like Bangladesh, Pakistan or Egypt.
We want to help the people there that they can still produce food, even though their salinity levels are increasing. If large numbers of people start immigrating, usually that causes friction or worse. For me, the primary interest is to just help people increase their yields, increase their livelihood, But in that way, you also assure that people stay in their communities, that they can still live and have a life, a healthy life as well, with the vegetables they can grow.
In the port of Rotterdam can be found another innovative solution to rising sea levels, the floating farm. It opened in May of this year, having been inspired by the devastation of Hurricane Sandy in New York in 2012 and the vulnerabilities that exposed in modern food production.
This small floating farm, the first in the world, we call it our living lab. This one is easy to scale it up and make it more and more attractive for cities to produce a part of their own food.
To reduce its environmental footprint, the 40 cows are fed byproducts from the city's food and drink industries. Producing fresh milk on the city dwellers' doorstep is a key selling point, but it also demonstrates that rising sea levels can be harnessed.
When you look at the world map, for instance, you see that a lot of big cities are situated in deltas. And deltas will have more and more problems in the next years. So especially for those cities, it's a very interesting solution.
Cows are just a first step. The property developers behind Floating Farm hope that one day poultry and vegetables could be reared on the water.
Well, it's here that we'll wrap up this programme under this hot sun in Portugal, a country very much on the front line of climate change in Europe. Thank you so much for watching. We'll see you next time on France 24.